Keep calm and carry on. That's the message from Britain's prospective prime ministers as they start to set out their positions on leaving Europe. Also on today's program, 3 days of national mourning. Baghdad is at a standstill after one of its deadliest days in years. And in Picture This, the final piece in the puzzle, China puts the finishing touches to the world's biggest radio telescope. Hello and welcome to the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garza. The European Union single market was founded with 4 simple freedoms in mind: the unfettered movement of people, capital, goods and services across national boundaries. And today it's the world's biggest market. But soon it will lose one of its largest economies after Britain decided to leave the Union. In Brussels, plans are being drawn up for what happens next. But in Britain, that must wait until a new Prime Minister is chosen. One of the key issues in the referendum was restricting immigration from the EU. But how can that be reconciled with access to the single market? Our newsmaker today is the UK, as we ask what kind of trade-off it can find with the EU.
Today, I'm standing
is one of the candidates
for the leadership of the Conservative Party
and Prime Minister of the United Kingdom.
We can make Britain truly great.
One of these 5 candidates will be the Prime Minister, who leads the UK's negotiations out of the EU. Andrea Leadsom and Liam Fox campaigned for the Brexit, and Michael Gove was one of the leaders of the Leave campaign. But one of the shocks is who isn't standing. Boris Johnson, the man seen as having won the Leave vote.
I have concluded that person cannot be me.
The candidates who supported Remain are Stephen Crabb and the frontrunner, Theresa May. But both have ruled out holding another referendum or finding a backdoor to Brexit.
Brexit means Brexit.
Both say the focus now should be on negotiating the best Brexit deal to keep access to the single market while controlling EU immigration.
Leaders made it crystal clear today.
Those who want to have free access
The single market requires acceptance of all 4
freedoms without exception.
There will be no single market à la carte.
The EU single market is a customs union. Its members impose a common tariff on imports from non-member countries and can trade freely with each other. But they must adhere to certain rules and standards. A country can have access to the single market without being an EU member. Norway, Iceland and Liechtenstein are part of the European Economic Area, but this requires acceptance of all 4 freedoms: freedom of movement of goods, services, capital and people. The UK could instead negotiate a bilateral free trade agreement with the EU, but this could still mean adhering to regulations, and there is also the chance of other non-tariff barriers. So if having access to the single market is a Brexit priority, but controlling immigration is also the red line, what kind of deal can the UK hope to get from the EU? The EU has told the UK to make its exit swift and without delay. But 48% of voters and some Brexiters are holding out hope that there is a way to avoid leaving the EU. And technically there is. The referendum was non-binding, and it is up to the British Prime Minister to invoke Article 50 to begin its divorce from the EU. But some legal experts argue that Parliament must first repeal the law passed when the UK joined the Union, so there is a chance Brexit could be blocked by parliamentary vote. If the UK doesn't get the deal it wants, would there be the political will to dismiss the desire of the majority and take Brexit off the table? Yvette McCullough, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now from London to discuss Britain's post-Brexit future, we have UKIP member and Leave campaigner Alan Craig and journalist, economist and author of the book Post-Capitalism, Paul Mason. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Alan Craig, let me start with you. I was going to ask you if Boris Johnson let you down by resigning, but I'm struggling to keep up with all the news coming from the UK. So let me rephrase that question then. Has Nigel Farage let you down by resigning, and has this been a cop-out from him?
No, I don't think so. I mean, he's
He's an exhausted man. He's given his all to this Brexit campaign. And unusually for politicians, of course, he says he's not a politician, but unusually for politicians, he's going out on a high, on a success. So from a personal point of view, from his own personal point of view, it makes a lot of sense. He can now go and have a holiday with his family and recoup his energies and so on. I think from the country's point of view, from the nation's point of view, I think it would have been helpful if he'd found the energy to stay on until the end of the Article 50 negotiations, which possibly could go on for a couple of years. He's a man with real standing and real command of the media. And if and when the British government wobbled a bit and didn't do what it should be doing, he would be a very powerful voice pointing that out. Okay. But I can understand it, and as I say, he's fairly unusual for someone to become a politician. He's going out at a high. Okay, let's put Farage aside for the moment. Paul Mason, let's do some housekeeping up front. These claims that the referendum was not legally binding, that it can be reversed, that an act of parliament might be needed to invoke Article 50. All this talk, is that a genuine loophole, or are these people wasting their time?
I don't think they're wasting their time, but they are, as we say in English, clutching at straws. I think that the clear will of the people in that referendum was to leave the European Union. I think there is an issue about when the trigger has to be pulled. Tactically, it's better for Britain if it pulls the trigger, the so-called Article 50, when there is a government that has a clear plan. The problem with Mr Farage, who you've just seen has gone, he did have a plan, but he only has one MP in Parliament. The Conservative Party in the Parliament behind me had no plan, and therefore it would be illogical for them to pull the trigger on leaving until they get one. But ultimately, I don't think there is any... look, we may end up, after 2, maybe 3 years of negotiation, with no deal whatsoever, and the British people would then be faced with simply falling out of the European Union or staying in. I think that will be a point where you could legitimately argue, no, we know we can't stay in the single market, for example, let's ask the people again. But right now, I voted for Remain. I'm very critical of the European Union, but there's no way I would be pushing right now for a re-entry or for another referendum or for any kind of parliamentary sabotage of the result.
Paul, you said that the Conservative Party and government didn't have a plan. Does the Labour Party have a plan?
Well, the Labour Party is currently split between its leadership and a majority of its members and a big group of its MPs in the Parliament, but relatively small number of people. I think actually, funnily enough, the one thing that they're unlikely to divide on is the issue of trying to remain within the single market. The problem is, what do you ask for in terms of free movement? What do you ask for in terms of a variation to the European rules on free movement? I think they may have differences there, but these are minor compared to the fact that the ruling party in Britain is completely split down the middle over what to do at all.
Yeah, Alan Craig, let's look at this from Brussels' perspective, with Angela Merkel, Donald Tusk and others. Based on what they have said, basically they're saying you can't have access to the single market, doing business without barriers and tariffs and so on, without accepting freedom of movement. That sounds totally reasonable, doesn't it?
No, there's been lots of positioning and posturing around the whole situation. I agree with your headline right at the beginning. Let's all just stay calm and calm down and have a look at the situation. There's two sorts of divorces in life, as in leaving the EU. Either you can have a mature one where we sit around and you take the keys and I'll take the house and you look after the children at the weekend, etc., etc. Or you can have an acrimonious one. And now I'm hoping that actually the EU will be mature about it. I'm expecting the British government, whoever is Prime Minister, to be mature about it and to execute the established will of the British people, which is that we come out. We've got to remember that we're a very strong economy relative to the EU and actually in the world. We're number 5 in the world in terms of size. We're number 2 in the EU. We're in a strong position. My own position, and it's not my party's position, although I suspect most of them would agree with me, is we start off with the red line is we want to become a normal country trading with the EU under World Trade Organization rules, and we're not expecting anything better than the United States or Canada or China or Russia have when they're, well, I didn't mean Canada, but the United States and Russia and Canada have when they're trading with the,
right.
the EU.
But Alan, you'd accept from their perspective,
they just trade
Alan.
under World Trade Organization rules.
Sure,
I think we ought to go for that as the backstop. That's, if
sure.
we can get anything better than that, then that's cream on top.
Okay, but the way they see it, it's as if you filed for divorce and now you say, actually, I want an open marriage and I still want to be with you and be with other people. They see this as some sort of reversal, wanting the open market, wanting to be a part of the open market, while having campaigned for so long on keeping immigrants out and not wanting the other half. Can't you see that from their perspective, Alan?
No, I can't see that at all. We're not asking. I mean, like all these analogies, if a marriage falls down, and it wasn't actually an equal marriage in the first place. It was a marriage dominated by the EU. We had to be supplicants all the time. So even my own analogy of a marriage falls down under those circumstances. But I think it is perfectly reasonable for us to go to them, knowing that they want to trade with us as much as we want to trade with them. Actually, they do more trade with us. We buy more from them than they buy from us. We have a massive trade deficit with the EU. So as everybody says, German car manufacturers still want to sell their cars in the UK. French wine producers still want to sell their wine into the UK. Why wouldn't they? So I think we'll be able to sit round and discuss and negotiate and come to something that's reasonable and acceptable for both sides, unless there are one or two at the top of the EU who just want to be spiteful and petty and childish. If so, let's see them. Let's see them. Bring them out. Let's have a look at them.
Okay, Paul Mason, what sort of model do you prefer? I mean, we see the Norwegians, we see the Canadians and others have these bilateral agreements with the European Union. Is there any model that you prefer?
Well, I think what makes sense is to apply to join the European Economic Area. That's the single market. We're already members of it, but to stay in it with all the exemptions that it offers. It offers the possibility of suspending freedom of movement, but we would have to negotiate that as a condition for coming out. I also think it gives us access to this massive market, and it says to that 48% of British people who voted to stay in that we are not trying to divorce at all. We are simply trying to renegotiate our relationship to this ever-changing and crisis-ridden institution. And I think what you've just heard from UKIP is part of the fantasy that unfortunately British people were sold 2 weeks ago, that if we break off from the form which globalization has taken in our continent, we are somehow going to be more global. No, this is an act of anti-globalization, reactionary anti-globalization, and it's based on the fantasy that that trade is everything. Trade in a modern economy is actually not the most important thing. It is the movement of capital, it is the movement of people, and you know, I would like for UKIP to explain where the growth in the British economy comes from when we can't fill our care homes with staff, when we cannot find staff for our national health hospitals, when 35% of the basic factories in Britain are staffed by migrants.
So let's get Alan to respond to
what are you going to do? Do you want to shut those factories down?
Sure. Alan?
This is just silly talk, isn't it? Firstly, this isn't anti-globalization or anything else. There's only one continent in the whole world that has gone the way that Europe has gone, the EU has gone, setting up this sort of super state, this supernatural state, this political state.
North America.
And it's dying. We all know it's dying. If I can just finish it. It's dying in the same way as the USSR died. It just rigor mortis sets in. And it is a declining market. It's a declining portion of the global trade. We want to look outwards. That's what we want to do. We have established links already, by an accident of history, we have established links with Commonwealth countries, which are some of the most buoyant and vibrant economies around the world. We want to be part of that. We don't want to have to go to Brussels to say, please, sir, can we trade with India, or can we trade with Australia, or one of these others? We want to be out there doing it. I'm extremely optimistic. I think we can do it. We can get out there and do it. I think it's just that the Romanians, I think, they're a bit frustrated because they didn't win, and there's a lot of sour grapes on their side. I think we need to be optimistic. We can do it. Let's get out there and do it. There's a world out there waiting for us.
Okay, Paul Mason, just stepping back for a second and looking at the big picture here. 2 weeks on, after that vote. Isn't it a little embarrassing that we're asking some very fundamental questions right now that perhaps should have been asked a long, long time ago, while everybody was debating whether 75 million Muslim Turks were going to imminently invade the UK, or even from the other side, whether it was going to be World War III if you voted out of the European Union? Isn't it embarrassing that we're having to ask some very basic questions right now?
I think that what is embarrassing is the fact that on both sides the rhetoric went, as we say in English, it jumped the shark. It became unrealistic. And I think on Mr. Farage's side, you know, the picture of a sea of brown faces coming from, in fact, Syria into Europe against the words breaking point was a very irresponsible, in fact, you know, closet racist form of campaigning. That's what's unfortunate. I am also very critical of the Remain side. We in the Labour Party, the left of the Labour Party, refused to take part in the mainstream rhetoric of Labour, of Remain, precisely because we thought it was unrealistic. But let me say this, I think many of the people who took these decisions, including that 52% majority, were well informed. I don't believe they've been duped either way to vote 48 to Remain or 52 against. British people are highly educated. They have a high connectivity in their lives. They speak to each other in clubs, pubs, local associations. Logic brought us to this. It's not in any sense, you know, there is a theme of the people are stupid. I think this is utterly insulting to both sides of the argument.
Okay, and I think that's a point at which you both can agree that perhaps there's a sense of contempt from the elite that people voted against their interests. I think you can both agree.
But that last point, I certainly would agree.
Yeah. Final comments from you, Alan Craig. 20 seconds, please, before I wrap.
I think it's a tremendous opportunity. This historic vote, absolutely historic. The British people were asked what they wanted. They made it clear, and I agree with Paul on this. They gave a considered opinion on the matter, and that's that. So it's up to the next Prime Minister, whoever he or she is, to negotiate our way out of the EU, and we'll be a free nation again. It doesn't mean we don't want to be friendly with Europe. Of course we want to be friendly with Europe, and actually, if they want it, we'll be friendly with the EU as well. But we need to get on and carve our own way and there's a world out there to trade with: Africa, the Commonwealth countries, the Far East, and so on. We need to get out there and get our people out there and trading with them. I'm very optimistic.
All right, Alan Craig and Paul Mason, thank you very much for joining us. Good to talk to you. Still to come on the Newsmakers, counting the cost as Baghdad mourns the victims of the weekend's bombing. And in picture this, China's biggest tool in the search for intelligent life. There will be 3 days of mourning in Iraq following a bomb attack on the capital, Baghdad. It targeted a mostly Shia area of the capital as families were preparing for Eid al-Fitr, the feast that marks the end of Ramadan. The Newsmakers' Francis Collins has more.
It was Daesh's deadliest attack in the Iraqi capital, and one of the worst in more than a decade of war. The truck bomb explosion at the shopping center was the first major attack in Baghdad since Iraqi forces recaptured Fallujah from Daesh, which lies around 50 kilometers away. But in Baghdad, such atrocities are nothing new. There's been a wave of attacks in the Iraqi capital in the last 2 months. Notably in May, when 3 explosions in one day alone killed 96 people. Days later, 2 more suicide bombings killed another 53. It's becoming clear there is no real defense against such attacks.
Most of the people in the building were in their 20s, and now 300 people have been hurt here. The government sits in a chair doing nothing when it comes to security.
This atrocity has ended the Iraqi government's air of victory after its forces recaptured Fallujah. The Prime Minister, Haider al-Abadi, and government officials visited the site in the Karada district. But video footage on social media showed a crowd chasing his convoy away. The anger is palpable.
People came to buy clothes to celebrate Eid. Now they're buying coffins. They're buying coffins. May God punish those who are responsible.
With thousands of vehicles on the move each day in the capital, such attacks are difficult to prevent. The Abadi government has introduced new measures, including the use of scanning devices across Baghdad and a ban on security forces from using mobile phones at checkpoints. But with the attention of government and security forces diverted towards retaking Daesh strongholds, is Baghdad now paying the price? It's becoming clear that Daesh is on the defensive. It's lost Ramadi and Fallujah, and it will soon face a campaign to dislodge it from its stronghold in Mosul. But as it's forced away from its concentrated areas in Iraq, is it becoming even more dangerous, more unpredictable?
This is a global challenge. The numbers of ISIL fighters now far exceeds what Al-Qaeda had at its height.
There's no denying that Iraqi Sunnis feel underrepresented and subjugated, and these attacks have been directed at the Shia areas. But like Al-Qaeda, which morphed into a far more vicious and dangerous foe when on the run, is there any guarantee that even when Daesh is defeated militarily, it too won't return in another form? Francis Collins, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now from London to discuss the developments in Iraq is senior IHS Middle East analyst Firas Abi Ali. Thanks a lot for joining us, Firas. Can we expect more of this disgusting lashing out from Daesh? They've lost Fallujah, they lost Ramadi beforehand, they might lose Mosul soon. Can we sadly expect more of this stuff?
Yes, and they're in the process of losing Manbij to the Kurds. And as they lose their more and more territory, the importance of showing their continued strength and continued relevance becomes greater. And so they will respond with more sophisticated attacks behind enemy lines, so to speak, aimed at maximizing casualties, maximizing damage, with the intent of pushing for a reaction from the Shia community against the Sunni community, because in their ideology, turning the Sunni community into refugees is quite suitable, because the way that they see it, it makes their recruitment efforts easier.
Yeah.
Keep in mind that this is a group that thrives on lashing out and then benefiting from the backlash.
Yeah, this is interesting because it's a bit of a riddle. They say this is sectarian, that they killed the Shia Rawafid or rejectors, as they call them, for being Shia. But I wonder how much of that is the sectarianism itself, and how much of it is just as a mere strategy to trigger a Sunni-Shia civil war in the country.
Well, it is both. If you look at the origins of the Wahhabi doctrine, a very large portion of it from day one was directed against the Shia, who were quite far away from where Wahhabism originated in Najd. So it doesn't have to be an either or. These people are genuinely religiously driven, but not only are they religiously driven, they also have forged a strategy out of this religious drive that aims to create conflict that benefits them. So it's actually both. It's not one or the other.
Yeah, the first order of the Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi in the aftermath was to ban those fake bomb detectors. Those were debunked many years ago, but many were still using them at checkpoints throughout Baghdad and elsewhere. This bombing happened just across the Tigris from the very well-fortified Green Zone. As we heard in France's piece and saw there, people were very angry at the Prime Minister and his convoy. They were even pelting it with stones. Can this Iraqi government keep its people safe?
Look, the Iraqi government is gradually losing influence to the Shia militias, which are becoming the real ascendant force in Iraq, and they're becoming more and more powerful. Incidentally, the Islamic State was able to take hold as a result of the sectarian policies of Maliki and as a result of the willingness of the Sunni community to buy into this ideology. The result of the expansion of the Islamic State has been to strengthen the Shia militias that the Islamic State was supposedly hostile to. This is not the first time that this kind of backfiring ends up happening to these kinds of far-right groups, and it probably won't be the last time. The Iraqi government is becoming more and more weak and incapacitated in this fight.
Depressing news, Firas Abi Ali. Thank you very much for joining us from London. In today's Picture This, China has just completed the construction of the world's largest radio telescope. Let's take a look.
100块这样的小三角形的一个反射面。
Today's newsmaker has been the UK, as we asked whether it can get a better deal outside of the European Union. Leave campaigners say the UK can keep free trade with Europe without accepting the EU's principle of freedom of movement. European leaders say this would be impossible. But will Europe be able to present a united front throughout the negotiations? Backing down now would open the door to other countries seeking to redefine their relationship with the EU. And that may be the most costly thing yet. Until negotiations take place, it's hard to know who has more to lose, but as time goes on, it should become clearer who needs who more. You've been watching this edition of The Newsmakers with me, Imran Garta. As always, thanks for watching. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.